Cece, Jamie, welcome to The Tangent. I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves since Matt isn't here, and usually Matt and I go back and forth just teasing each other a lot before we start talking. But I think that since we're talking about the partnership to end human trafficking, it's a more serious day. There's some more serious stuff. And so just bantering isn't quite the right tone, I don't think. Right. But tell us, who are you and what are we talking about today?
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to kick off. My name is Jamie Manirakiza, and I'm the Executive Director with Partnership to End Human Trafficking. And I'll share just a little bit about us, and then I'll turn it over to Cece. But we were founded in 2016 to address the urgent need of human trafficking, both here locally and regionally, specifically to provide housing, job training, and employment opportunities for survivors of human trafficking in our region. And we do that through providing safe housing for up to 2 years for anyone who comes to one of our homes. We have 2 safe homes in the state of Connecticut, as well as providing long-term support after housing and job training and employment through our social enterprise business, the PEHT Shop, which is located in Fairfield, Connecticut. So I'll pause there and I'll turn it over to Cece.
Thanks, Jamie. And hi, Father Sam. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, I'm Cece Donoghue, and I'm the community liaison, and I do the volunteer engagement for the Partnership to End Human Trafficking. I've been with PEHT in some fashion, first as a volunteer and now working for them since I think 2021, the end of COVID.
Okay, nice. Well, this is a very local show then today. We get to interview people all over the place. It's nice to have somebody close to home. You guys are right here in my backyard in Fairfield. That's amazing. All right, so tell me a little bit about. Well, I guess we've got a big event coming up. Let's really just dive right into all the good stuff. Tell me about this event that's happening in New York City.
Do you want me to take that, Jamie?
Yeah, I think you do a great job.
So we actually have 2 big events, but it's at the same place. So September is a big month for us. During the time that our survivors are with us in our 2-year residential program, they have the opportunity to heal through art. That's one of the programs that we run for them. And, they all come in saying, I'm not an artist. I don't do this. I'm not an artist. And yet they create amazing works of art. I mean, they're so moving and they're beautiful. So a few years back, the staff thought, we should really do an art exhibit. And so we started exhibiting their art locally. And this year, we're excited because we'll be doing an art show, an art exhibit called A Window into Human Trafficking, Survivors, Hopes and Dreams. Was titled by one of our survivors. And we'll be exhibiting at the Sheen Center for Thought and Culture in New York City. The show runs from September, I think, 3rd or 4th through the 29th. And on September 9th, we have our art exhibit opening and reception at the Sheen Center. So it's free to the public. People can come anytime between the 3rd and the 29th, but we'd love to see people. They can register by going to sheencenter.org. We'd love to see people at the art exhibit on the 9th. And then following the art exhibit, we have a great panel presentation with expert panelists, and begins at 7:00 on September 18th, also at the Sheen Center. We'll have the panel discussion, and after the panel discussion, we'll break and go into the art exhibit and have a reception. And again, that's free as well. So we would love for any of your listeners to come and join us at the Sheen Center. And Jamie can actually elaborate a little bit on, probably a little bit better than I can, on our expert panelists. She knows 2 of them really well. So do you want to share, Jamie, about our panelists?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Sure, yeah. So we're going to be moderated by Kevin Ryan, the former CEO of the International Covenant House. And he's obviously been he's been very connected to this issue for a long time. And then we have Tayana Bianame, who's the executive director of Coalition Against Trafficking in Women International, who has just a wealth of information about trafficking globally and here nationally, and best practices and policies. And then we have a local FBI victim specialist, Laura Rizzo. And so I worked with Laura years back when I worked for the Salvation Army in New York before coming here in Connecticut. And she's enthusiastically offered to join us and talk about the issue locally in New York. So it's going to be a great panel. I'm on it as well. I'm going to talk about the work that we're doing and the ways that folks can get involved. And so we hope that folks can come out. It's definitely going to cover human trafficking from a 101 to 201. What is the issue? What's going on? As well as how can people get involved and really create some impact from whatever point that they're addressing this issue from.
Wow, outstanding.
Father Sam, we should also say the name of the panel is called What You Don't See, Understanding Human Trafficking and Finding Hope. People don't realize that they probably see human trafficking more than they would ever imagine.
Yeah. That's something I want to get into. But if I can just throw in a clarification for people who are very local to the Fairfield County area, the Sheen Center is on Bleecker Street in Manhattan. And the Sheehan Center is in Bridgeport, and the Sheehan Center is where you go for CYO basketball, and the Sheen Center is a different place entirely in a different city. So do not come to the Cardinal Sheehan Center in Bridgeport. No. Please go to the Sheen Center for, what is it, the Sheen Center for Culture and Art or something? Go to the Sheen Center, Bleecker Street, for Thought and Culture. The Sheen Center, Bleecker Street, Manhattan, not the Cardinal Sheen Center in Bridgeport. Both wonderful places, but very different purposes here. Okay, now that we've made that important clarification, the Sheehan versus Sheen, one is named for Lawrence Cardinal Sheehan, the first bishop of Bridgeport. The other is named for Archbishop Fulton Sheen, the famous orator and author. So. Right. We're not overly creative with our names here. Like the Diocese of Bridgeport has like a half dozen or more parishes named St. Joseph and another half dozen or more named St. Mary's. So we've not really done a great job getting creative. And I guess just in the Catholic Church, we have very common names, very similar names, etc. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what this human trafficking that's sort of hidden, because it seems to me actually, and this was a term that I thought was interesting, that I don't know when the term first started being used, but it feels to me very recent that we started talking about human trafficking. You'd heard of drug trafficking and arms trafficking and things like that, but this idea of human trafficking, it seems like this is a term of relatively recent usage, that this was not spoken about before, at least not in these terms. And so, yeah, it seems like a problem that has long been right under our noses. So tell me what's going on with human trafficking, and what does it mean, and why have we started using this term so specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump with that a little bit. So, I mean, I would say there's probably two things going on. The term is, relatively recent. I can unpack that a little bit, just for listeners, where it started being first used sort of in the international sphere and in the US. I would also say there's just more public perception with the term being used in common media. I think we've labeled the crimes of human trafficking in ways that provide anonymity or some sort of cover for the perpetrators of the crime for a long time, right? So when we unpack what human trafficking is, I think we've often masked those crimes in ways that might seem less damaging to those who are committing them. When we think about the higher profile cases and the ways in which we sometimes have not always elevated this crime to what it really is. So I think we're hearing the term more because it's in sort of our public sphere and our news media. But the term itself originated in 1990 with the Palermo Protocol. So the crimes of exploiting individuals for forms of indentured servitude, modern day forms of slavery, modern day forms of sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, right, have been around since biblical times, since forever, right? When we think about human beings being exploited for labor or sexual servitude. but in the 1990s, the United Nations Palermo Protocol was created that sort of indoctrinated in our international law what human trafficking was. And it wasn't until the year 2000 that the United States actually created the crime of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act under the federal statute. So when you think about how long crimes have been on our crimes code and our books, 25 years is actually a pretty short time frame.
Yeah.
Making this a pretty recent crime in sort of our modern day dialogue. And prior to that, individuals were continuously being looked at as sort of runaways, throwaways, being arrested for crimes of prostitution related to sex trafficking. And although there's a lot of intersection there and nuance that we won't go into, sex trafficking is often taking that form. And so what we want to raise is just awareness for individuals who are being exploited within our communities all across Connecticut, New York, and our country for the crime of sex or labor trafficking, really at any given point in time, every day. We see these crimes committed against children and against adults. And so, we seek as Partnership to End Human Trafficking to address that on the survivor care end. So providing the aftercare, the response from crisis to long-term recovery. But there's still such a need for just awareness raising so that we can identify more victims within our communities and protect individuals from being exploited by this crime or being recruited by perpetrators.
Is it safe to use human trafficking? Yeah, it is. Is it safe to use human trafficking sort of as the broad umbrella that covers labor, sex trafficking, and everything else? So in that case, then, if we're using the broad label like that, in the Partnership to End Human Trafficking, who do you find that you're working with the most? Are you working with people who are sex trafficked, trafficked for human labor? What's the most common for you?
Yeah, we primarily, both. We do serve both. Do you want to cover that, Cece?
No, I mean, we do
Go
serve
ahead.
both. I mean, primarily we do deal with women. In our residential program, we can only take women. So we deal with women who have been sex trafficked. But, we also have cases of people who have been labor trafficked. Both sex trafficking and labor trafficking are prevalent in Fairfield County. And in fact, on the labor trafficking side, we are working with Catholic Charities of Fairfield County with helping to identify people who have been labor trafficked. They're partnering with us. But predominantly, we're dealing with women who have been sex trafficked.
Okay. Maybe we start just on the labor trafficking side of things. Where do you see it, and how do we become more aware of it? You were saying before that we probably are seeing human trafficking right under our noses all the time and don't even realize it. So, what are some of the places where that labor trafficking is going to be really common? You don't have to name specific business we locations,
see it in construction, we see it in landscaping, we see it in domestic workers, people that work inside the home that aren't being paid fair wages. And trafficking is not just people who are in like human slavery type of the modern day slavery that people think about. You're trafficked if you're not being paid a fair wage for the job that you're doing. So, they're usually it's vulnerable people, and it's all over in construction, nail salons, domestic workers, nannies. What else, Jamie?
And I would say the not being paid fair wages along with elements of force, fraud, or coercion has to be present for it to rise to that criminal level. We see a lot of individuals on the labor side that certainly are being labor exploited, right? So whether they rise to the criminal element of labor trafficking would include elements of force, fraud, and coercion that perpetrators are using to keep them engaged in labor servitude. But we see it across all the industries Cece talked about. And I mean, it's things like somebody might be even here on a legal form of a visa, on a guest worker visa, for example, that is tied to their employer. This is a really common visa that can sometimes exploit people. So then that employer who might have malicious intent decides to say, I'm going to pay you, let's say at the end of every week or every 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden 2 months have gone by and the individual is saying, I haven't been paid. I need to be paid. And then the employer, this might be a common scheme, decides to threaten that individual if they keep asking for payment by saying, I'm going to have you deported. I'll take you off of your visa if you keep asking me for your money. I'll pay you in 2 weeks. Maybe the person then remains silent, accepts that threat for a little bit, keeps working, asks their employer again, hey, I still haven't been paid. I need to be paid, A, for their own livable life, but also to send money home typically. And then their employer threatens them again with abuse of the legal system. That would be one of the elements of coercion or threats, and says, I'll get you deported if you keep asking. Don't ask me again, right? And maybe keeps them in employer-based housing, employer-based transportation, employer-based food, and then charges them an unreasonable amount for all of those things that they're providing, thereby creating oftentimes a modern form of indentured servitude that's happening right within our midst. They're the folks who are showing up with the landscaping crew to do your yard weekly. Meanwhile, they may be living in employer-based housing, transported by their employer, fed by their employer, and not being paid. And if the employer is also leveraging any forms of threat or coercive control, there you go. It amounts to, I mean, obviously, I'm not building the full prosecution, but these are sort of the understandings of how folks are often entrapped in labor trafficking right within our midst, and we may not know it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a different thing if, say, the wage isn't quite high enough or not commensurate with the kind of work that they're doing, and you just have an ignorant employer who's not aware of the fact that they should probably be paying a few dollars extra per hour to this person. And if they're told they'd raise it, but like an unfair wage or a wage that's maybe insufficient isn't the same thing necessarily, right?
Well, it has to have as Jamie said, the forced fraud and coercion need to be, sort of walking hand in hand with that.
Okay. And so this is, and the immigration issue in particular, I think sticks out especially strongly because that's a form of leverage that an employer can have. What about when immigration's not the issue, or isn't a viable, forgive me for saying it that way, like a viable threat that an employer can use against somebody? Do you see labor trafficking happening in other ways?
I mean, to any vulnerable people, if you're hungry, if you don't have food, if you don't have your basic needs, if you don't have a roof over your head, you're a vulnerable person. And, if working under duress, under force, fraud, or coercion for a lesser wage or no wage is going to provide some type of food, is it really a choice? You're going to opt to eat, or you're going to opt to have a roof over your head, that kind of thing. So yes, it could happen to any vulnerable person, whether they're foreign born or born here in the United States.
Are there other forms of, the threats
no,
that
go
would be
ahead, Jamie. Yeah.
That would be non-immigration related too, although might still happen in foreign-born cases in the U.S., are also threats against individuals' family members or loved ones. So oftentimes traffickers, whether it's a domestic case or a foreign national case, will often be strategic in identifying areas of vulnerability, areas to threaten and levy against that victim as a means of coercively controlling them and compelling them to do whatever it is that they want to force them into doing. And that we see that on both sex or labor trafficking. But if you don't do X, this will happen to your family back home, or I'll recruit someone else. And that's obviously as well a very powerful threat that can keep somebody compliant or quiet and unable to leave the situation that they're in.
Okay. And then it would seem like with that vulnerability, you've got a vulnerable person who's lacking basic housing, basic food, whatever they might need. The labor trafficking might be one thing, but it would seem like it's almost an easy on-ramp to sex trafficking. For people who end up victimized that way. What have you found in your work that becomes sort of the most common path that people end up trapped that way?
Go ahead, Jamie. Jamie, you've been doing this for 15 years, so you would have many more examples of that than I would.
I would say there's no one size fits all path that folks often that I would say this is the path you can point to. But I would say, I mean, Cece touched upon it. We've said it a few times. Just traffickers often identify an individual's vulnerability. So they figure out whatever that weak point might be and whatever it is that they can promise to fulfill. That's typically a fraudulent promise. So if it's a young person looking for love or a relationship or someone to get support from them, then they might pose as a boyfriend or a safe, supportive figure in their life that's going to care for them. And then they'll eventually groom them, recruit them, and exploit them. Similarly with labor trafficking, they're going to identify your weak point. Do you need money? Do you need shelter? Do you need to provide for your family? And promising some sort of false pretenses that then sort of that contract flips and turns and it becomes coercive. The terms are not what the individual thought that they signed up for. And then there's some element of maintaining them in that. And so there's a lot of ways individuals can get recruited through the internet. That's a really common means now. I would say that's a common denominator when we think of sex trafficking. It used to be other means, but now with the rise of iPhones and technology and social media, I would say the internet is a very common pathway that we see individuals recruited. And then there's further means when it comes to labor trafficking. There might be other ways, but still the internet, ads for employment, false traps to kind of lure someone into a job market that's not real, or promises of a modeling gig or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking with the rise of like so many social media influencers and things, do you find that people have been promised a career, easy money, fast money, if they do the following things, and that ends up becoming it? It never pans out to be any kind of. You don't become an influencer. You don't become anything other than a sex slave or something. I mean, is that? It would seem like that's a really common, or at least could be a really common thing. There's this allure. I could have a career. I could make a lot of money, and I could make a lot of money real fast. But that it's not gonna pan out.
Right. Those are the lies that the traffickers will tell.
Yeah.
Will tell people. Will tell young girls, and then young girls are groomed for a while, where they believe the trafficker is looking out for them, is going to get the modeling jobs. They just have to do this one favor or just 2 more favors for this trafficker, and then the modeling jobs will be coming in, or the movie jobs will be coming in, and then that there are stories of women who start with just pictures as a model, and then it's pictures not clothed, and then that sort of translates into pornography, and then movies and those types of things. It evolves, and that's what the traffickers do to those women or young girls that are looking for the fast money, the big break, that type of thing.
All right. So then recognizing that there are these vulnerabilities, and every person on earth has certain things that they're vulnerable to. Do you find a particular population that's most prone to this kind of trafficking, or does it cover every part of the social spectrum? I think the thing that I always come to is you'll hear stories about somebody who gets caught up in something or gets stuck somewhere, and the thing is that kind of thing doesn't happen to a person from this town or from this school or something like that, and then you see that it certainly can. Or the other end of the spectrum is this is just kind of the sort of thing that happens to this type of person or a person from this background. It's almost treated as an inevitability. So is there a concentration that you find, or is it very, very broad and common?
I would say, trafficking can certainly impact any community and any socioeconomic status. And we've had victims, and I've worked with survivors over the years from any, multiples of backgrounds. But trafficking does disproportionately, and research shows us, and just the work that I've done over the years has shown me that it does disproportionately impact women and girls on the sex trafficking side, and women and girls of color in our communities, particularly here in the United States. We see a significant amount of justice involved youth that also may disproportionately be represented by women and girls of color in our justice involved system. And so we often see many of those individuals who are at high risk and at greater risk for the recruitment by traffickers. We see a lot of recruitment out of the foster care system, out of children and protective services systems. And so there's there's an overlay of vulnerabilities that we often do see. And it doesn't mean that anyone can't fall prey, especially with the rise of the internet and loneliness on the rise, social media that can threaten and harm individuals, mental health sort of being on the rise and turning individuals into darker spaces to look for attention or to look for happiness can attract anyone, but we do see a disproportionality.
Does justice involved, does that refer just to people who have had direct contact, like they've been arrested or they've been to jail, or does that apply to like the children of incarcerated people? Like my dad went to prison and because he went to prison, he wasn't around to supervise me. Mom was working all the time. And so I got caught up in this. Like, would that make me a justice involved person? That's what, by the way, my dad did not go to prison. I should just clarify that. He got away with it. No.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
I would say justice involved. When I say that, I mean more so individuals who they themselves are involved in the justice system as maybe a dependent or a delinquent. As a minor, I'm referring sort of to looking at young people who might, for some reason or another, be involved with the justice system, whether that's as a dependent because the state has stepped in some capacity, or they have been charged with or convicted of some sort of juvenile crime, and then get further kind of placed within that system, whether it's into a treatment facility, a group home, placed in foster care. Sort of this displacement of youth often leads to higher vulnerabilities for traffickers to recruit them into a promising life, a life that might be better than what they're currently experiencing. It's not to say all kids, but there is a really high prevalence of trafficking and exploitation that we see with foster care and sort of youth that come in and out of the system. But the scenario you described, whereby a youth may have an incarcerated parent and or a single parent that's working around the clock to try to provide for them and is absent, or in a wealthy family in the suburbs where parents are both working and may not have time to always know what their child may be doing after school hours or at night online, can certainly lead to high risk vulnerabilities for that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like in that way, like it can cross socioeconomic statuses.
Yeah. I was just going to say that. I mean, while Jamie did bring up, that largely young girls and women of color are disproportionately trafficked. To be honest, human trafficking doesn't discriminate. So if you have a vulnerability, you're vulnerable to a trafficker.
Yeah, I think just recognizing where these vulnerabilities lie, it kind of puts you on your guard, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So parents want to take care of their kids and make sure that this kind of thing isn't befalling their children. What can they do? How do we help parents to protect their kids, or to just be aware of the warning signs?
As a parent of 5 children, you have to talk with them. Yeah. You have to talk with them. And even before I was really involved in sort of the anti-trafficking movement, I knew enough, especially with my girls, to talk about it and to be nosy with what they were looking at online. You just have to be. It wasn't for myself at all. It really was for their safety. I think, we've worked hard to put together this coalition, Fairfield County Coalition, against human trafficking. And Jamie can talk more about that. But we sit in these coalition meetings and we hear the Stamford Police Department, the Westport Police Department, the Norwalk Police Department talk about, young teens who are vulnerable because of the internet, because of their phones, because of, like you had just mentioned, the influencers that they're following. But every child, these traffickers are getting into our homes.
Yeah.
Through the internet and through phones. So, parents need to have this conversation. And while we need to raise awareness across the boards with individuals and adults, we definitely need to be educating our children.
Yeah, Matt and I have had a bunch of conversations recently just surrounding social media and what it's doing, and some of I think the real pitfalls and the real dangers of it, but just the internet in general is really tough. I think there's also, and Cece, you're a parent. Jamie, I don't know if you have kids. I don't. I'm a priest, obviously, so it's a little different. But I think that it's an uncomfortable topic for parents sometimes to bring up. And I could say, as a priest, it's an uncomfortable topic to bring up with parents, to talk to them about this. And at the same time, it's I think this has to be, these are things that have to be brought up, and that we do have to make sure that people are aware of. It's an uncomfortable and unpleasant topic, but it's very, very real.
Yeah, Father Sam, we need to normalize that conversation, though, so that it's not uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We need to be able to talk about it openly and freely and normalize the conversation of what's out there, what can happen, that trafficking is real. And it's right here in Fairfield County, It's everywhere. So I understand that it is difficult, and those are difficult conversations to have with children. But the more you normalize it with your kids, the more they will feel free to talk with you about it. Then they won't have inhibitions about coming to you with, I saw this friend at school and, her personality has changed greatly and she's coming to school with a lot of new clothes. And, you told me once that sometimes that's what bad people do in order to garner trust in people. So we have to normalize that conversation, as hard as it is. We need to be doing radio shows and things like that so people hear about it more.
Yeah.
I also think, go ahead.
No.
I am a parent of 3 kids, but, okay. And my children are young, but I believe that it's important to start talking to your kids as soon as they even start school, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, in an age appropriate way. So, sure. The way I might talk to a 7, 8, 9-year-old is different than how we're going to talk to a 16, 17, and 18-year-old. But I think the best ways to prevent trafficking and or even just the forms of online exploitation and extortion that are occurring at really high prevalence amongst young people is to make it really comfortable to know that we can talk about this. I don't know that it's a matter, as much as me personally, just being in this work for so long, would love to protect my kids from ever seeing anything harmful online, or being a part of anything harmful online. I don't think it's a question of if they will, it's just a matter of when they'll be exposed to it. And I think we have to accept that, because if we don't accept that, then we don't engage our kids in having a conversation about what they're going to see, and letting them know that when they see something that seems off, or however they might frame it in their young mind, right? We don't want them to normalize explicit or unsafe images that they could see from peers at school or from others. And so we want them to recognize that as that wasn't okay, what I just saw. It was shocking, or it was this, but it wasn't okay. And when I see something that's not okay, I'm going to talk to my parent, knowing that I'm not in trouble, right? Because we don't want to get into that shame cycle. So I feel it's important, right. Like Cece said, to normalize talking about it. So that you can stop it and say, it's okay, but here's the way that we can kind of pivot or go away from that, or talk to someone if we see someone who's showing it to us, and help them to not show it to other people. Because I do think, unfortunately, kids are really just exposed to way too much. And then they feel nervous to explain what they've seen. And then it just further keeps it in the dark. And I think just We just need to bring things out to the light.
Yeah, some of the best advice I heard on that line of thinking was from Matt Fradd, who's a Catholic podcaster, and for years he did a lot of work helping people to break their addiction from pornography. He still does that work, but he'd often get the question from parents like, "How do I deal with this? My kids have started to be exposed to it," and his advice to parents I thought was so good, and I've actually been able to apply it in my own parish work to tell parents like, you don't have to be mad at your kids about this, but instead start with, "I'm so sorry that this happened to you." Put it in that context that this is an image that you shouldn't have been exposed to. This shouldn't have happened. And then they know that they can speak about it, that they can talk to you as a parent about this, that this isn't something that they're in trouble for, that they're bad for having seen, but that it's something that happened. And I remember talking to a parent here, and he just said that his kid was at a birthday party, and one of the kids there got on the iPad, and the way he said it, he said, "Pornography happened." Like, it wasn't like the kids didn't know what they were doing and suddenly it was there, and the kid was mortified by the whole thing. And his response I thought was just so good, to say, "I'm so sorry. That shouldn't have happened to you. Let's talk about it," and to give his child the space to actually really be able to break that open and understand it. But yeah, to remove the shame cycle, I think, Jamie, that's a great description. Yeah. This is reminding me too, as we're talking of, I don't know, have you guys ever heard of Matt Christopher? Matt Christopher was an author, is like a I don't know, young adult children's author sort of. And when I was a kid, I used to go to the Stratford Library and I'd make a beeline straight for this one particular bookshelf, because I knew that's where all his books were, and they were books about sports, and each character, like whatever sport they were playing, some other story was going on around them, some other thing was happening, and there was one as a kid who was playing hockey, and basically he got sucked into one of these hockey factories. So he was going to go and play travel hockey, and then he was not being allowed to call his parents, and he was being trafficked for hockey, essentially. Yeah. And I remember reading this and just thinking, like, I can't imagine, because first of all, I was never a great athlete. Let's just admit that and get that out there right now. I was never going to make it in the pros. I'm not big enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm not skilled enough. I wasn't going to be good like that. But I also had, I think, very good coaches growing up. And so the idea that a coach would do something like that. So the profile of somebody who's engaging in trafficking, I think we have to realize that it could be any kind of person, and just because you're in one position or another doesn't really matter. Is there like a typical relationship that you find people who have been victims of trafficking of any kind, typically like were trafficked by a particular type of person or a person in a particular position?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that trafficking is often happening at the hands of somebody that's known to the individual. So I think our first stereotype is like a stranger danger, or a trafficker is going to abduct someone, similar to the movie Taken. But actually, the majority of cases that I've worked with, the trafficker is known to the individual. I'll give an example of years back, I used to work in a Philadelphia juvenile court system, and it was shocking to me in the very first cases that I sat in week 1 and 2 of court. Many of the individuals who were juveniles that were being trafficked were trafficked by a parent, a caregiver, or like a step parent, somebody who was the guardian of that child, in theory, and supposed to protect and keep them safe, with the very person who was actually exploiting them, or knew that the exploitation was occurring and looked the other way. So I think, unfortunately, we can't rule out familial trafficking. And I think sometimes we don't think to look at, caregivers or guardians as individuals who could be the perpetrators of this crime, because it seems so heinous. But unfortunately, that may be the case quite often. Or it might be somebody that's known, a person who the individual identifies as a boyfriend. Not necessarily a stranger who abducted them. It's more coercive and nuanced in nature, where the person's developed a relationship and a rapport. And as you mentioned, sort of there's a power dynamic, whatever that might be, whether it's physical strength, whether it's money, status, I think we also have to recognize many of the buyers of this crime may also be people of status, that their stature in society poses a threat to that victim as well coming forward.
Okay, can we pause on that one for a second, because that you alluded to it before, and it's something that has the more it's been pointed out over the years, the more it has come to bother me. But the idea that you'd have, well, let's take sex trafficking and prostitution in particular, that the woman arrested for prostitution is the one who has the heavier burden in the law, is the one who is maybe punished more severely, name is published and things like that, whereas the soliciting, the one who was looking for the prostitute, the guy arrested with her, name is hidden, picture doesn't make it in the paper, but that's kind of backwards, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, Cece, did you want to respond to that at all?
Yeah, no, I mean, I know you're going to go into length about what we're doing we need to stop victimizing the victims, right?
Yeah.
And we need to remove the demand. And if we didn't have buyers, then we wouldn't be having trafficking, right? So, there are laws, there are certain states that are starting to implement laws that go after the buyers. And Jamie can elaborate on that much better than I can.
Yeah, you brought this up, Father Sam. In all 50 states, we have laws that on state crime code that goes after the sale of sex and the purchasing. But interestingly, if you just do policy analysis of individuals who are arrested on those crimes codes in most states, you see that we typically are arresting the individual who is selling sex, which is typically a victim or a woman. And you don't see as many arrests for the crime of purchasing, even though we have laws to address both. But it is the ongoing just perpetuating of a really disproportionate, harmful, patriarchal, disproportionate gender system that is just going after the victim versus going after the perpetrator in almost all of the cases. And so oftentimes we're advocating not to legalize prostitution. There's a lot of harm in that, but to decriminalize the victim. So don't arrest the victim, but do arrest the buyer and the third party facilitators. So arrest everybody else involved in the crime, but divert the individual towards services, towards housing, towards economic job training, mental health services, etc.
Because it would almost seem like if you're prosecuting the person who has sold sex, part of the issue is that they may be caught up in human trafficking and not be doing this by choice. And you've got to rescue them from that. But if they're just getting arrested and then thrown back out on the street after they've either done some time in jail or at least created the criminal record, well, then they're in a position where it's harder for them to get a job. It's harder for them to get employed. And so they go back to this because that's the one place where they have some safety. But if you save them from sex trafficking instead of charging them, again, I'm with you. I don't think legalizing prostitution does anything. I don't think it helps anything. But save people from the sex traffickers, and you'd have something better. I saw this in the newspaper not too long ago. It struck me. Don't tell the Connecticut Post. They keep delivering the newspaper to us for free. We canceled our subscription like over a year ago, and I keep getting a copy. So I was looking through it, and what I was really struck by was that they had photographs of people who had been arrested for selling drugs, people who had been arrested for getting into like a bar fight. But they also had articles about people who were arrested for child pornography, possession of, people who were arrested for sexual assault on a minor, but no picture of those people. And I thought to myself, no, those are the ones who should have their picture plastered all over the paper. Like, that's the crime that should be, like, if there's somebody who's a threat to the kids, like, we should know their face. The guy who's got in a bar fight, I don't care. Like, no offense to the bar fight. I feel bad for the bar owner who has to clean up after that and everything, but that's not the same thing. It's just not the same level of threat to the community. So why aren't we why aren't we putting out the photographs that way? So anyway, this is the thinking that I kind of find myself going into. Am I crazy for thinking that way?
No, not at all. I mean, the system that has continuously protected, I would say when we think about sex trafficking particularly, I think our system just is set up to protect sex buyers and to protect those who are in places of power often, because I think they're often protecting their own. They're the individuals who are often trying to keep this crime hidden and or lessen the penalties. To see how much sex buyers, they're the disproportionate response to this crime. Here's an example. I mean, for years, newspapers would publish. Sometimes you still see it. It's shocking if you do, but sometimes you still see that sex trafficking bust, whatever, and then you might see prostitutes arrested. And you think, how can you have a sex trafficking bust, but then have arrested victims? When we have any other crime, we don't arrest the victim of that crime. We offer them counseling. We offer them services. We offer them a response. Yeah. And so there is a significant power dynamic that has just been incredibly harmful in the sex trade and to individuals who are exploited in that industry. And you know, we don't look at them as human and humanize their experience and divert them to trauma-informed care and recovery services that can help them to restore their lives.
Yeah. Do you think that in these last few years, especially, just looking at some of the really high-profile cases that have made major headlines and have occupied a lot of space, whether it's like the Me Too movement, different criminal trials that have been out there, looking at like U.S. gymnastics and whatever the latest like celebrity trial is, or what was that movie that came out a couple years ago about human trafficking?
Sound of Freedom. Sound of Freedom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. Has that? Do you think has that raised the profile, the awareness, and started changing the way that people think about these things, and perhaps even started to change the way that laws are enforced or policy is formed?
I mean, I think, well, twofold. I think that these high-profile cases, Sound of Freedom, have raised public perception of the crime and opened up. I mean, one of the benefits of Sound of Freedom, although, you know, there's a lot of misinformation about how to understand the crime in the film, because it's not a documentary, it's a film and it's meant to be entertaining. Mm-hmm. So it does lead to some misrepresentation of how the crime occurs and the sensationalism of that. That's hard when you're a frontline worker, and then we miss the everyday average case that's happening right within our midst. But the benefit of those films is it raises the public's perception to discuss and dialogue about trafficking as a crime that we should talk about, we should care about, we should look for the victims. And so that's a benefit of any sort of splash of media, I would say, is that it's an opportunity to dialogue and to engage survivors, subject matter experts, in sort of shedding light on the reality of what it looks like day in and day out so that we can identify more victims. One of the challenges of this crime is victims, if your house is robbed tomorrow, you would go home if you saw that somebody broke in and you'd call 911 and you'd report a crime and you would say, this is my address, this is the crime that just happened, come investigate, right? You'd be sort of a helpful, compliant victim. But with trafficking, victims almost never self-identify as a victim of this crime because of all those elements that we talked about at the beginning of the show of force, fraud, and coercion. Those coercive elements of control that are often psychological in nature often force the victim into believing that I have chosen what's happening to me, it's my fault, or whatever it might be, victim blaming, victim shaming. And so you often see a delayed acknowledgement of the crime, if at all. And so they're not typically coming forward asking for help. And so this makes it a much more complex crime to investigate, right?
Yeah. Wow. So then, Partnership to End Human Trafficking. Are you guys focusing on caring for victims after the fact or helping people to escape from those situations? Is your focus on I'm not even sure exactly what the right phrasing is, but like making it possible for providing pathways for people to come forward if they are in a situation of trafficking, perhaps even without realizing that that's what their situation is, or seeking the help that they really need and deserve. Are you doing a little bit of both? What's the emphasis for you guys?
It's both. Yeah. So we are both. You can refer, so victims can self-refer to our agency 24/7, 7 days a week. They can call us. They can go onto our website. We have a Get Help Now button. We also have an escape browser. So if somebody's unsafe and searching for help, they can log off quickly. But they can also fill out our Get Help form. They can call us. They can submit an inquiry to get help. Providers, we also do a lot of provider education to identify victims that are within their midst. So law enforcement, school, social service agencies, like our partners at Catholic Charities, who serve a wide population across all of their programs. So trying to educate the community so that people can proactively identify the risk factors and individuals who could be coming to their services that all of a sudden drop off, or that they recognize they're being vulnerable, and they can report it and get them help. And then once somebody's referred to our services, we do sort of a pathway of healing options. So it could be emergency shelter at a hotel for a temporary period of time while we find someone else another longer stay for housing. Or it could be 2-year housing. We have our 2 homes are meant to be longer term recovery. So folks have like a real option to exit and to find the support that they need for long-term healing and recovery. And then ultimately, we have, for folks who stay with us through our long-term program and continue to work on their healing and recovery, we also have job training and employment options. So folks can become meaningfully and gainfully employed with us. And that allows them to recognize that they are not only free from exploitation, to not return to their trafficker, because they now have a means and an on-ramp to a different life, where they're being paid from a job, they're building their resume, when they can see that they have options for their future that doesn't have to involve returning to somebody who is exploitative.
Wow.
And
so then, go ahead.
Oh, well, to give you a sense, and listeners, right, when we think about, we've talked about this crime, it's global, it's national. I mean, we're here in Fairfield, Bridgeport, Hartford. We have a total of over 58 clients right now enrolled in our programs. And we have 7 individuals enrolled in our long-term housing, 9 in our community-based housing, and then 58 who are either waiting for housing, or we have them enrolled in shelters throughout the community or elsewhere. And and we're just one agency, and really we have a wait list. So we could serve even more people if we had more resources. So that's just to give your listeners a breath and a sense of this crime.
Well, you're anticipating my question, Jamie, which is like, what do you guys need in order to keep doing what you're doing, in order to make that dent in this massive problem? I'm tempted to ask you to just solve the problem of human trafficking for me right now, but I think that we both see it's obviously a much bigger issue. But what does the Partnership to End Human Trafficking need in terms of, like, where do you see the biggest need for your organization to sustain the good work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest need, sort of always, like any nonprofit, is typically funding related. Just the more funds we have and resources, the more housing we can provide, the more people we can employ and set on their pathway to freedom. We always need hands-on volunteers and support. And Cece Donoghue, who's been on with us and I think has had some tech issues, but you can always find her on our website. You can get in touch with us. She answers those emails. But we do quarterly volunteer trainings. We have one actually coming up in September as well. So we can get that info out to listeners if folks want to become a volunteer. And ambassador for our program. And then I would say other ways that folks, outside of just supporting us and finding ways to garner more resources, is showing up for the awareness events that are so critical, because that's another, easy way to join in the fight and to become educated, and then to further become an ambassador for PEHT or for this crime in the place that you are. So come out to the Sheen Center on September 9th and 18th. Come to a volunteer training. or just invite us to do a training in your own community. We do trainings at churches across the region as well as schools. So we can always provide education for sort of whatever audience invites us.
Amazing. Okay. That's great. Jamie, where can people locally here in Fairfield County, what's the address for your storefront there?
Yeah.
For the pet shop?
I'm in the shop today.
PEHT.
Yes, PEHT. It's a play on our name, but pet shop. So it's folks who have graduated out of our programs and then find employment with us and make products that we sell, and 100% of the proceeds go back into our mission. We also carry other fair trade products. So we are at 1630 Post Road in Fairfield, Connecticut. So stop by our store Tuesday through Saturday. We're open all day. And then we also have online shopping. So you can go to our website at pet.org, pht.org, and you can shop on our website the same products that are in store. And they are packaged and shipped by our survivor team. So every purchase you make, continues to fuel the mission and provides hope for women who are working for us, that people see them and want to support the work that we're doing.
Amazing. That's great.
We're awesome. Really appreciative. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. It's clearly such a need, so important. So Cece and Jamie, I'm really grateful to you guys for being here. The whole month of September is going to be really busy for the Partnership to End Human Trafficking down at the Sheen Center in New York City. We will have a link in the show notes there so that folks can access it and can go and support you, both to the event in September as well as just to the Partnership to End Human Trafficking in general. And of course, if you're here in Connecticut, stop by in Fairfield and go visit their store on the Post Road. It'll be great. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate you coming on The Tangent today and having this conversation with me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Father Sam, and to The Tangent for having us.
Thanks for watching today's video. Let us know what you thought down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.